be worthwhile to have an interesting conversation because both of us might learn something and we might have the opportunity to bring a bunch of other people along for the ride, which seems like a good additional bonus. And so we both come to this conversation with that story in mind, and then we can play the game as a consequence. And even though we don't know each other, because we assume goodwill on each other's part, not only are we not anxious in each other's presence, apart from whatever additional relevant features might have to do with being on a podcast, but we can also take some pleasure in joint movement towards the shared goal, because the dopamine system to me seems to indicate progress towards a shared, to the instantiation of a vision. It's something like that. And then if you're acting in a manner that makes the vision appear to me making itself manifest, then that's rewarding. And that reward has an existential element, a phenomenological element. You can feel it feels good. But then the dopamine, what it does neurochemically seems to be to track the neural systems that were activated just prior to the manifestation of the success and make them grow. And so once you establish a shared narrative, if you negotiate it successfully, you also increase the probability that the neural architecture manifesting that vision, making that vision manifest in skill and apprehension, is more likely to dominate in the future, more likely to take priority in the future.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm just noting you've now sort of brought in dopamine as an important neurochemical part of the anatomy of sense making and exchange. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because in my world, the way that one might describe that and interpret all of the empirical evidence is very much along the line of this notion of pursuing a narrative, and in this instance, a dyadic narrative, or a narrative about how I should behave in a dyadic context. And if I resolve my uncertainty, and just to open brackets, just to come back to your nice observation about we might learn something from this exchange, I think that speaks to that novelty bonus you were talking about. A bonus, certainly in machine learning, this information gain, this epistemic affordance that is part of the good narratives and the good paths into the future would be seen exactly as this sort of novelty bonus. So that is part of the reward. So if in this exchange we are both realizing, you use the word instantiating or realizing through committing to the right narratives, literally a narrative of verbal exchange or linguistic exchange here, and that secures a resolution of uncertainty about what you think or indeed about what I think, then that will be rewarding in the sense it's minimizing uncertainty, minimizing expected surprise, minimizing, if you like, entropy in the sense that you originally introduced it. So I think that's there's an important, if you like, generic thing, concept that you're bringing to the table here, that all these ways of looking at good narratives and good engagement with the world, I think are all very internally consistent, especially when placed in terms of interpersonal interactions. And they also actually have biophysical correlates in our brains. And you've identified a really important one, which is dopamine. And we could talk about, and I suspect you would want to talk about, what's special about dopamine relative to all the other chemicals that are responsible for message passing and belief propagation and sort of getting the hierarchical fantasies aligned in order to explain what I'm sensing, what I'm hearing, and indeed what I'm saying.
So do you want to elaborate on the role of dopamine? I'd be more than happy to hear what you have to say about that. So, because we talked about surprise minimization, but this is reward and reinforcement, and so and the propagation of growth, and that can happen artificially. I mean, if you dose yourself with cocaine, you can produce a cocaine-seeking narrative that's instantiated in your brain, and that's actually what constitutes the addiction. In some sense, it's a cocaine-seeking personality that's a unidimensional monster that now comes to dominate your neurophysiology in conditions of deprivation. That's a very bad idea. You've generated an internal parasite that's fed on this externally applied chemical. But so if you could elaborate on the role of dopamine, I'd be more than happy to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just picking up on that nice notion of a cocaine addiction being sort of parasitic, I think that's absolutely right. It's sort of almost as if there's been a short circuit, a hijacking of the normal mechanisms that we would, our brains would certainly bring to the fore to actually choose and register the choice of the right paths forward. So for me, reward just is that minimization or realization, minimization of expected surprise or uncertainty. So it is intrinsically rewarding to resolve uncertainty and to secure and seek out those novel things or avoid those unfamiliar, uncharacteristic, obstacle-like states states that do not characterize me. So dopamine, I think, read like that, just is the fact you have resolved uncertainty. So if I get a cue in the world, say a conditioned stimulus, that tells me, oh, I now know exactly what I'm going to do next. I'm going to, if I'm a little monkey in an experimental paradigm, I'm going to receive a drop of juice and I'm going to drink that. If I am somebody engaging in a social conversation, then I know exactly where this conversation is going. That's great. I know exactly what I want to say. So I think that's when you get the dopamine blush, that resolution of uncertainty. Suddenly you see the path forward clearly. And it is exactly, and I'm using path in your sense of the micro story that's responding to the affordances. What's special about dopamine, though? Well, it's a neuromodulator. So it plays the role in the brain as not of sending information from this neuronal structure to this neural structure or this set of neurons to this set of neurons, but greasing the pathway by setting the excitability or the game, by being the chemical mechanism by which you will switch on this set of messages or that set of messages. Another way of saying that is it sensitizes. For example, let's come back to your sort of hierarchical structure, that the micro stories are informing, or perhaps the mismatch at the lowest level, the prediction errors at the lowest level, are inducing belief updates at a higher level to get to these simpler, more abstracted invariances you were talking about before. But how much does the high level listen to the low level? And how much does the low level inherit or respond to top-down constraints afforded by your simple high-level abstractions, which could, of course, be the narrative. So chemicals like dopamine, and I wonder whether you also want to talk about things like serotonin in relation to things such as depression and learned helplessness. All of these neurochemicals have one thing in common. Their role in the brain is just to sensitize one set of neuronal representations to messages from another set of neural representations. And when placed in your hierarchical context, that can have a profound effect on the balance between how much you're attending to what's going on out there. So the microstructure, the low-level sensory constructions that or categorizations that say you might think are being played out in the early visual cortex or the primary auditory cortex, relative to your coherent, deeply structured narratives about me in a particular world. So, I would imagine that a lot. Where you might want to go with this is just thinking, well, how might that go wrong? And what would that look like if I had an abnormality of these neuromodulatory transmitter systems in the brain? And of course, you've highlighted one of the key or a key abnormality, that which is induced by drugs of abuse or misuse nowadays, such as cocaine. So that's, I think, drug addiction is a really good example of what tends to happen if you mess with these really important systems.